Hey everybody, this is Tony Gray from the Prioritization Security Podcast. Welcome to episode 8. Today I'm going to share some CISO secrets on how to deliver value using something that I call security commits. Now, all CISOs have to deliver value. We just can't pontificate all day long. And sometimes the tricky part of delivering value is it can be very technical. It could be difficult to understand, particularly for non-technical executives that your team supports and your program relies on for support and resources. So we're going to talk about two things at once in this video. We're going to talk about how to deliver business value reliably that actually builds credibility for you. And then the second part is we're going to learn about how to talk to executives in terms of outcomes and outcomes that they can understand, they can internalize, and then actually be able to support you perhaps in a manner better than what you've been supported in the past. As always, I may be a CISO, but I'm probably not your CISO. And so please don't take anything that I have to say as legal, regulatory, and any other sort of advice. Please leverage your resources internally in order to make the right decision for your organization. I'm just an opinionated guy on the internet that may or may not give you some ideas for things that you may be able to use in your own program. Also, I'm not speaking on behalf of my current or any previous employers, and any and all opinions that are expressed are my own. So this presentation is primarily an attempt to answer the question of how can I measure delivery progress and communicate that progress in a value-added way to my executive team. We'll cover why current approaches don't work for setting expectations with executives in terms of what's being delivered. We'll also talk about a simpler, more pragmatic approach that's needed for prioritization and a new way to think about and communicate Infosec commitments. We'll also discuss a new model that supports reliable quarterly deliverable of Infosec commits. And then lastly, I'll demonstrate 4 examples of how to communicate the progress and status of security commits to your executives. So I wanted to start this video with kind of a metaphor. Imagine if you won the lottery and you were putting up an apartment building and you hired a team of construction experts, technical experts in construction to perform the work for you. And this was going to be a multi-quarter, multi-year construction project. Again, strictly hypothetical. So if every time you went to the construction manager and asked about progress and you either didn't hear concrete examples of progress that you understood, or you heard highly technical descriptions of the work that was going on and that you didn't understand, or if things never seem to be finished, but always seem to be in flux or always seem to be in progress. Not a lot of things seem to be, falling off the plate, if you will, in terms of being done. So think of this in terms of how the executive team views your security program. Are they getting the information that they need so that these investments that they're making over multiple quarters, multiple years, actually make them feel like it's contributing to something? Now, you may well know that it's all contributing to something, and you may have, that perfect plan up here in your head, but you're not the one who has to support and resource this. And so your ability to communicate progress is a key skill set of a chief information security officer or any sort of senior security practitioner. Doesn't matter if you lead the security program or you lead a team within that security program. So there's actually an underlying premise to this presentation. Execs value reliability in delivery. In fact, they value that more than probably talent, intellect, any sort of really cool security stuff that you may be doing. They want to know when they can receive delivery, and they want to know that when you tell them that things will be delivered at a certain time, they will be. Here's why the underlying premise should be important to you. Execs relate reliable delivery with credibility. The more credibility that you have as a CISO or as a senior security practitioner, the more likely you are to get the support and resources that you need in order to pursue future projects, because you'll have a history of actually having delivered in the past. But execs can only support you when they understand what's being delivered, they agree with you in the value of what's being delivered, and they can count on that value being delivered on time. Now, as soon as I start talking about delivery, I'm sure there's a number of viewers whose mind goes immediately to Agile. And I'm not talking about Agile in this video. I'm talking about a much more pragmatic and purposeful approach without a lot of ceremonies that are associated with it over a quarterly drumbeat of time. What's also important to understand about this presentation is the key part of success for security commits is that there has to be a culture change around what priorities are actually priorities for your organization. And we're going to work through that as part of this definition, but it's important to remember that there is a culture change that's probably going to be required here, because when we use the word commit will have exactly that definition. We are promising to deliver whatever functionality that we say we're going to deliver. I've seen a lot of organizations where they slap the term commit onto things, and commit could be a commit, or hey, we had other things to do, or we got distracted, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So a key aspect of commits is they're really formed around what I call outcomes, not projects. A lot of organizations are strictly project focused. They'll say, and there's no talk about what the maturity is that's being delivered. The problem that I've seen with outcome focused organizations is it doesn't easily allow for maturing things that have already been delivered. I've been in meetings where the senior security practitioner involved was describing a project that in reality was just maturing some of the things that they had done before. But one of the execs simply asked, wait a second, didn't we already pay for that last year? So there had been no discussion about what was actually going to be delivered and no conversation around what had been left. And what's left. That's really where outcomes. You can crisply define not just a project that's going to be delivered, but what done looks like for that project, and in conversation address any future potential maturation that's required. The relationship between a project and outcome is that the outcome is really the benefit or value to the organization or to the execs that will be delivered by the project. So there's some extra work involved in order to ensure that the executives understand what the benefit or value is, and that's inherent to the definition of outcomes. If we looked at an example conversation between an exec and a senior security practitioner, we'd see how outcomes perhaps provide more tangible understanding for execs, and how it opens the door potentially for high quality conversation that might ensue. So if an exec asked a simple question of, well, what does the next quarter look like from an Infosec perspective? I have here, we'll work on stuff, but no one would be that general. But lots of organizations don't really know how to describe what it is that they're working on in a way that executives can understand. So even if you say, oh, we're deploying a data loss prevention solution, we're upgrading our CASB, we're doing this, we're doing that. It may sound to an executive like, hey, we're going to work on stuff. That's not so effective. A different answer might be, oh, we're gonna implement Plat. Now, you may be thinking, hey, what the heck is Plat? Exactly. That's exactly when we use vendor names in the hope that an executive might actually understand what we're talking about. They have the same feeling as when I mentioned Plat. That's a made-up word. In fact, I Googled it to make sure there was nothing that was showing from that. It's a fake name, but the same momentary pause that you had when I mentioned Plat is the same momentary pause that executives would have when mentioning product names that they have no idea about. So that's not a very effective way to talk about it. Or you may respond, we're going to deploy some data security projects, if we don't get distracted. As an executive, the executive probably knows that data security is important, and they might be thinking, well, why would we get distracted from something as important as data security work? So lastly, we might have an answer like this. Hey, we're going to deliver some capability that allows employees to securely transmit and receive sensitive data internally and externally to the company. And we're going to write some governance around storage of sensitive data. And a follow-on to that might talk about how this has been a gap historically in the organization. This may be the first time that you're doing this, and we plan to have this sort of results. Here's what we're going to have when we're done delivering this that we don't have today. That's the way to phrase a commit. That's the way to convey the importance of what the work is that you're doing, instead of talking in some diluted, generic way, just based on the assumption that the executive is going to know that whatever you're doing is important because, you're a security practitioner and security practitioners only do important things. That doesn't work out so well. The big win of security commits for me and in our program is that they represent pre-negotiated prioritizations. And that prioritization is right behind incidents. So incident work, obviously, stop, work on that. But then commits come next. And you're probably thinking, what? But commits have some more criteria around them that make them special. The first is they're exclusively program building work items. Whenever I mention program building, I mean that in three ways: creating new capability, maturing existing capability, or strengthening governance. So they have to be one of those things in order to be commit. So they are going to either, make your program better in some way, faster in some way, more efficient in some way, or better governed in some way, or remediate a specific gap that has hopefully already been communicated to the executive team. So next we have to talk about media outcomes. And there's really two extremes to how to plan for what you'll call commit work. The first is anything could be a commit. Oh, I'm working for 4 hours on this, on whatever. I'm going to call it a commit and put a checkbox next to it. That doesn't really work. The other extreme is I'm going to plan for 8 hours a day for 12 weeks in the hopes that nothing else distracts me from completing this work, meaning incidents in this particular case, or even day-to-day business like meetings and checking email. A meaty commit represents 6 to 10 weeks of about half-time work. That's how we have to scope commits so that they're meaty enough to make to tangibly push the security program forward in some way. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, there's a lot of things that take more time than that. Right, I understand that. But we're not working to sprint to get everything done and not deliver it. We're looking at a velocity that will get us, that as the second priority will not only get completed, but also give us time to do other work that we know is going to come in, distract us, but it still lets us set incidents as a first priority and commits as a second priority. Another important point, there aren't two-person commits or multiple-person commits. Each team member has their own commit. This is what they are responsible, they are accountable for delivering as part of their quarterly projects. It obviously would be focused on whatever their area of expertise is. So an endpoint security engineer would deliver obviously endpoint related security commits. Cloud, same with cloud. AppSec, something related to CI/CD pipeline or scanning or something like that. So in each case, you'll have a set of employees that are, in addition to their operational work, will be creating new capabilities, will be maturing existing capabilities, or will be strengthening governance. And quarter by quarter, each of these commitments will collectively begin to tangibly strengthen your security program. The other thing that commits do is they can be measured like a business process, because they'll become a business process as your second priority. Don't believe me? Your incident response program as your first priority probably has a business process around it. I would imagine you'd have some sort of incident response plan. There's a whole set of things that collectively form the business process of responding to incidents. Why shouldn't your second priority have the same thing? So if you're wrapping process around your security commits, you can then treat it as a business process, and then like any other business process, you should be able to measure. And that's what separates commit work from your day-to-day operational work. So I proposed a model for Infosec commits that, interestingly, the vast majority of the work actually occurs in the prior quarter. There's a backlog that's reviewed. We prioritize the backlog. We select something. We begin to, for each employee, we scope that work to that 6 to 10 weeks of half-time work, and then we finalize that outcome. We decide this is what we agree is going to represent the commit. Next, we execute. And then after execution, so you create this new capability or mature this existing capability, you generally have to operationalize that. Now, some of the process of operationalization might be large enough to be its own commit in the next quarter. We have examples of that in my own program. And so that might be totally normal. Now, as a CISO, you're also going to want to take your prior quarter commits and publish the results. So you're going to want to actually create a document, not just communicate. So you actually have a record someplace, stored someplace in a repository of what commits have been completed, not completed, what's still pending, and then hopefully some process wrapped around your commit business process. Now, as a senior security practitioner, it's really important to publish and document your progress on security commits. As mentioned, I provide some samples of this towards the end of this video, but publishing the results then becomes part of the historical record of your security team, and it also shows what were priorities at a given point of time as you start extending through series of commits over quarters. My current security team is on quarter 16 of using this security commit process, and we can look back and see where we were addressing different items that were obviously some of the highest program building priorities at that time. Even if I don't necessarily remember the quarter anymore, the documentation of the commits that were involved for that quarter can give me some insight into what our thinking was on that time based on our available headcount and resources that we had to address commits. Those published results can result in conversations around what was delivered, what remains, how we intend to prioritize and address whatever remains as part of the work that has to be done. What does this mean? Well, it means that we are establishing a model of what we're going to prioritize quarterly moving forward that is second only behind incidents. And when we use the word commit, we plan on putting the full power and weight of our organization into completing those, as demonstrated by the prioritization that we've given it right behind incidents. Now, there's incidents, there's security commits, and then there's everything else. And you may be thinking, there's no way everything else can fit in there. The only thing we're going to get done are security commits. Now, remember that we're scoping security commits to be 6 to 10 weeks at half time for a single team member. There is time to do quite a few other things, what I call goals, distracting work that comes in, break fix, anything that you need to do, you'll have time to do. And while it may not seem like a given quarter will produce huge results, I guarantee you, if you deliver on all of your security commits for anywhere from 2 to 4 quarters, you will really see a tangible increase in the capabilities of your security program. My team's been doing this for 16 quarters now, and we've always found time for other work. We've always delivered on the security commits because they're our number two priority. Now, an interesting point is this: there's some negotiation involved with your executive team, because they're going to need to understand that these things that you define as a commit are so important to your program that you're giving them special status at priority number 2. So what happens if you start seeing distracting work, particularly coming from above, so your executive team? 2 things you need to think about. Number 1, perhaps you didn't do a good enough job of explaining what the commits are and the value that they provide to the organization, so that the executive team is in agreement that, you know what, for a quarter, these are the things that I want the team working on. The second part of this is you may not be working in sync with the priorities of the company itself. Great example is when organizations use their security framework as their security strategy, and they're working on whatever control, let's say cyber threat intelligence, and they have a lot of their resources focused on that, and the company strategy has moved towards mobile applications, and there's no security plan around where the company is going. The closer the alignment between your organization's priorities and the commits that you're delivering, the less likely it is for your executives to put any pressure on you in order to change your commits. And then over time, as you're delivering regularly and reliably, more trust will be placed into your hands in terms of deciding what these commits should be and what those priorities should be. But the trust has to start someplace. And so my recommendation as a pro tip is that you over communicate if necessary, the value of the commits. And if you can demonstrate how they're aligned to the company strategy, now you have more weight for the approval. In the first couple of quarters, like I said, we're at quarter 16 right now. In the first 2 or 3 quarters, I went to the execs and I asked them to approve that commit work, having them fully understand that these would be our second priority only to incidents for that quarter. And it got to the point by the end of the first year that or other organizations that wanted us to do work would come to us and say, hey, we've got some important work, but we know you have to finish your commits, so we'll wait to program or plan this work into your next set of commits. And that's what we did. Again, reliable delivery builds credibility, and credibility builds trust. So it's really important as part of development of these security commits to understand where the company is headed, ensure that your commits align with the direction and strategy of the organization, and that will begin to reduce any requests that you get in order to change your commits, because your most important things should also be the most important things for the company. So another key concept that CISOs need to understand is, a lack of a plan is a vacuum. And this is so true. Whenever other executives perceive that there is a lack of a plan for something important to them, they will generally fill that vacuum with their own plan. And their own plan generally works out to be unplanned work. It's kind of even a metric that you can use when you're seeing a lot of requests around something. It generally means that there's a vacuum there, or a perceived vacuum there, and either you need to develop a plan or you need to be more purposeful around communicating the plan that you already have in place. So next we're gonna work through a number of ways that we can use this information that we're developing to demonstrate to executives that there is a plan and we're making progress on that plan. The most obvious is a weekly progress report. In my organization, we use this weekly. We have the commits. We show what progress was done in the last week. We also show what's planned for the next week. We're very specific and purposeful around how to show next steps. But this, in a regular drumbeat, reminds executives what the commits are. They're expressed in terms of outcomes, so it's pretty easy to understand what the value is that they provide, and then we'll know as we're getting close to done. At the end of the quarter, I like to send some sort of summary that shows that whether or not we completed the plans. You'll also notice here that what we've done, we've broken them down into categories like application security, governance, whatever, so that it's clear what commits are associated in what discipline of the security program. Next, you can also have a format that's a forward-looking plan, in which what you see here is a single view of planned commits for whatever the following year is. So a senior security practitioner can demonstrate what work they plan to do in the next year and then show that work by quarter. And what that does is that provides assurance to teams that perhaps have dependencies on some of the commit work getting done, that you've considered it, they know what the time frame that it's going to be delivered, and then once you have that credibility that you can deliver reliably, they can begin to ease some of the pressure that they may otherwise have to get their commit work done. So here's an example of an end of year review that I might use with C-level executives or board members. And there's a lot of, in a simple single view, now you can get a lot of context for the work that the security program delivered in a given year. For instance, I've separated the colors between blue, which were things that we planned at the end of the previous year, and yellow, which were opportunities that came around to deliver additional capability that shows in a combined view what was delivered for AppSec, for cloud, for data security. If they were completed and they met their particular outcomes, that would be marked with a green. If they were not delivered, that would be a red. And if sometimes circumstances change in your organization, so there may be items that because of reorgs or anything like that simply couldn't be started for whatever reason. And in these examples that I have here, I have one that shows that a reorg impacted a particular commit that we had planned on delivering, but we never even started it because of the reorg. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the time that we spent together. Remember, please subscribe. I put a lot of work into these videos, and if you get some value out of it, you can show me that you received value by hitting the like button and also subscribing. Again, thank you, and I so appreciate being able to share CISO secrets with you. Thanks again. Subscribe.